On this In Tune to Nature show, I'm so excited to bring you along with me on my 3-week journey through Tasmania, Australia. I'm host Carrie Freeman with Radio Free Georgia. I've created a multi-part podcast series from all the audio that I took along my recent travels, and you compare that with the gorgeous photos I posted on the Facebook page for In Tune to Nature to get a feel for this extraordinary place and its animals, like wombats, kangaroos, wallabies, seals, whales, birds like cockatoos, forest ravens, magpies, wrens, fairy wrens, and kookaburras. Often I'm adding in my own audio commentary and context as an American traveler and animal and environmental advocate, but other times I'm just quietly recording the voices and sounds around me, particularly of the other animals there. I was so fortunate for this to be my third visit to Australia. Years ago I had visited Sydney and also the tropics of Queensland and also hopped over to nearby New Zealand. But this is the first time I visited the city of Melbourne on the southern part of the Australian mainland, using that as the international airport I flew into and then taking a regional flight down to the island of Tasmania for the first time. Tasmania, or lutruwita, as the Aboriginal Palawa people call it, is one of the closest human-inhabited places to Antarctica. And our hot and humid June in Atlanta in the Northern Hemisphere was their winter in the Southern Hemisphere, which was one of the reasons I went there. But surprisingly, I found the Tasmanian winter to be similarly mild, like an Atlanta winter. The journey for the itinerary I'll take us on is a visit to Melbourne on the front end of the trip, and then we spend a week traveling through northern and eastern coastal Tasmania, starting in Cradle Mountain National Park, where I see my first wombats, through the second largest city, Launceston, and the wine and agricultural region, over to the east coast to the iconic Wineglass Bay and Freycinet National Park, and then down to Maria Island with so many wild animals, including kangaroos, and Port Arthur Historic Convict Site, then south over to the largest city, Hobart, for a week for my participation in the Conference on Communication and Environment at University of Tasmania, and a post-conference on Deep Ecology with activist John Seed. And we also get to meet two of their biggest environmental activists who started the Green Party in Australia, Christine Mills and Bob Brown. Then before flying out of Melbourne on the mainland of Australia, I share my tour of the Great Ocean Road, where I got to see my first wild koalas up in the eucalyptus trees, and more kookaburras, magpies, and kangaroos at their gorgeous national parks. I don't have many Australian human voices in the first part in the Tasmania series, except my Freycinet boat tour guide, Anna.
Make sure they sidle up to that boat. Wait for
and you don't get to hear my bad Australian accent impression until the second part in the series, unfortunately. But for this first part, sit back and enjoy the Australian accents of many of the other animals of Tasmania. Oh, but I want to note that I chose not to go to any zoos or even anything labeled an unzoo or a sanctuary, because oftentimes they seem to offer some limited petting or feeding experiences, which seemed a bit zoo-like to me, even though many of the sanctuaries like Bonorong are doing important rescue work. I could have seen and recorded a lot more animal species at those wildlife facilities, like the Tasmanian devil, quolls, echidnas, betongs, bandicoots, tiger snakes, ring-tailed possums, and platypuses, all Tasmanian animal species I didn't happen to see in the wild this trip. But I chose to experience Tasmanian free-living wildlife in the wild, or at least the free-living animals who were willing to come in the vicinity of humans, realizing that I wouldn't get to see as many species, but feeling it was a more natural and respectful eco-travel experience. Oh, and as part of my compensation for the resources used and greenhouse gas emitted for my international trip, I made some donations to the Tasmanian Land Conservancy and the Aboriginal Land Council of Tasmania and the Friends of Bonorong Wildlife Sanctuary. I stayed a few days in the city of Melbourne in Australia on the way to Tasmania rather than kind of going straight from an international flight to a regional flight. And so I stayed in the central business district, really like beautiful old English and European style buildings with kind of modern skyscrapers. And there's all kinds of trams, as they call them, which are like streetcars going by. But what I'm going to remark on here is the fact that I saw a cockatoo. So not a cockatiel, the parakeet, but a cockatoo, like the parrot, which is wild there. And I remember seeing them in Sydney. So you see pigeons too, but these are birds around the city. So he was just up on a traffic light. This is a cockatoo. It's in Melbourne. There he goes. That's the tram. I noticed a workman watching me take this audio and all these pictures of this cockatoo up on the light post because he's probably thinking, what is she doing? Because they're kind of normal birds around there. But for me to see like a huge white parrot with the yellow fluff on his head and to hear those odd sounds of the parrot calls among all the traffic noise and the tram noise and the little beeping of the pedestrian crossing seemed really unique to me. So this next clip is after I took the regional flight. It's only an hour and a half across the Bass Strait to the island of Tasmania, just south of Melbourne. And I flew into their second largest city, Launceston. It's just kind of in the northern part of Tasmania. Tasmania is about the size of Ireland. So it's kind of a big island, but yet you could get across it easily in half a day. And so this is me at the car rental place just listening to some frogs I could hear in the bushes. I was really probably stalling because I was going to have to get in the car with the steering wheel on the right side and then me driving on the left side of the road over to Cradle Mountain. But I had to go to the grocery store first. So I think I was also just stalling because I was nervous about driving on the other side of the road. But I did it. Oh, and you'll have to hear the frogs with the airplanes landing and taking off around them since we're near the airport. It's my first morning in Tasmania, and I'm at King Solomon's Cave outside of Launceston, although there was a sign that says the staff apologizes if it causes any inconvenience, but it's closed today for a staff meeting. So I'm the only person here, but there was a little nature walk back to the car park. And I mean, I feel like I'm in Jurassic Park or something. There's just these giant ferns everywhere. And it just feels like a rainforest. And it's really quiet. I want to try to record some of the sounds for you, but it's actually too subtle. I don't think it's going to pick up on just like the droplets of water falling. And I hear just like one or two birds in the distance. And I've been taking lots of close-up pictures of ferns and moss, and it does feel kind of otherworldly in here, and it's really quiet. Let me see if I can capture some of the sound for you. Okay, that was my attempt to capture sound, but literally there was nothing on the recording that was being picked up. The sound was just all way too subtle and just so quiet. So yes, I am in like a temperate rainforest there. And I was literally the only one around, the only one in the parking lot, no humans around. And even driving on that road, I like saw one vehicle, and it was from their hydroelectric power company because that's the main way they get electricity out there. And they're really into a lot of renewable energy in Tasmania. I had wanted to go to some of their caves, and also one of the caves has glowworms, but again, it was, since it's the off season, the staff were not there, and they only have tours at certain times anyway. But I was so excited that I had come exactly at 2:30, and I just made it for the tour. that I thought was happening that wasn't happening. But anyway, so off I went to my extremely adorable and wonderful Tiny Escapes cabin. It's like a tiny house that was near Cradle Mountain National Park. So I'm heading west. And it had beautiful windows looking out onto a heavily forested mountain and valley. And very private, and you slept up in a little loft with a skylight, and then you could see all the stars. Although it was raining the whole time, so I really couldn't go outside or use the fire pit. But it was beautiful and very quiet, except for some bird song, which I'll share with you. This is me walking at Cradle Lake, or Cradle Mountain National Park around Dove Lake, which is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. It's misty and cold right now, but it's off season, so there's not a lot of tourists. And there's really not a lot of, I don't hear any wildlife noises, but you might hear a waterfall, and you can just hear my steps on this well-maintained boardwalk that has some mesh over it to keep you from slipping and sliding around amongst all these beautiful, mossy, twisty, Dr. Seuss type trees. And maybe some trickling of lots of little tiny waterfalls that go underneath. Here's some audio of one of the many tiny little waterfalls created by the drizzling rain trickling down the hillside along the Cradle Mountain Dove Lake Walk. This Dove Lake Circuit Walk was really the perfect amount of exertion for me, the perfect walk. It's a loop walk, so you never retrace your steps. You're walking straight around the lake, and it's 3.6 miles, and it's mostly flat or like a little undulating, and then there's one part where you kind of crest up on a hill, and it was a little hard walking down because there's so much water that it turned the very beautiful stone steps into a bit of a waterfall. It wasn't pouring rain, it was just kind of drizzling, but I still was having a great time. Also, the weather conditions created a lot of wonderful rainbows, so I kept seeing rainbows from my tiny house and in the park. And I kept seeing the same tourists because there wasn't that many people there. And so you would talk to some of them and then you'd see them again. And like when I was walking away one time, the guy was like, bye, American. And I'm like, I'm sure that's what everyone would like to hear, that Americans are going goodbye, because people around the world are kind of commenting on the Trump era here in the United States, and it's greatly affecting them, negatively affecting people around the world with the tariffs and different climate policies and different things. So as you travel as an American in this political age, and because America is so involved in so much global politics, you can't help but kind of commenting or have tourists comment to you about the political situation. But everybody actually was very friendly to me. And if you wanted to take this walk and you had lower mobility, you could walk just up to this little charming boathouse and around the other way, and just kind of meander along the boardwalks in both directions, and you don't have to do the whole circuit. And they have a really nice visitor center at Cradle Mountain National Park, and we've been talking about the Dove Lake Circuit. And it is part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site, which takes up the whole, there's a lot of the western, especially southwestern part of Tasmania is wilderness area. And so I actually didn't go any further south or west because a lot of it is not accessible via roads, which is awesome for the wildlife and why so much of the island is designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In Cradle Mountain National Park, they have a shuttle system that takes you to 4 different stops. And I was waiting for the shuttle that morning along with this guy from Perth who had a huge backpack because he was doing the overland trek where you walk along the ridge and then there's these little huts where people stay. So also Tasmania, like New Zealand and other parts of Australia, has all these walks you can do for backpackers that are very organized with different huts, kind of like our Appalachian Trail. So I wasn't really up for that kind of thing, but he was getting ready to go. So we had a nice long conversation because it turns out we were waiting in the wrong spot for the shuttle. And we both have PhDs, and so we were saying how useless they were, but we finally realized 45 minutes later we should have been standing on the other side of the visitor center. Anyway, someone also had told me if I want to see wombats, I should get off at Ronnie Creek, and which is a beautiful meadow with little creeks running through it, and then it's got a boardwalk. It's in a valley, and it's got all these beautiful grasses. Well, there was several wombats, like mothers with grown babies. So the babies were almost as big as them. I assume they were babies. And then they looked like they were males kind of off in the distance. So here's some sound of me getting close to the wombats by putting my phone audio down closer to them because they were around the boardwalk and like chomping on grass under the boardwalk. They were completely unfazed by people taking pictures of them and video and walking on the boardwalk above them while they were on the grass because they're just so used to it, even though they're wild. The sound of 2 wombats chomping on some grass in Cradle Mountain National Park, Tasmania. I'm driving from Cradle Mountain area through Sheffield on my way back to Launceston, and once you get through the mountainous area down Cradle Mountain and those curvy roads, and this is also driving, of course, on the left-hand side of the road, right-hand side of the car, and it's also very misty and kind of drizzly, cold outside, maybe like in the 40s or probably in the 40-degree range, and it's very rural area, but they mostly seem to be growing, I would say, crops for cattle because there's a lot of cows, both the kind that are raised for their meat and the kind that are raised for dairy. So there's a lot of them. It doesn't seem that industrial though in terms of a factory situation, in terms of a lot of sheds or anything. And like the few times I have seen chickens, they've actually been just by the side of the road running free, and just a few of them. So I haven't seen anything like in the United States that are the long warehouses filled with chickens or pigs, at least from the time I've driven between Launceston and the Cradle Mountain area across the northern part of central Tasmania. And I do see a lot of road kill, if you want to call them that, along the road, which I had heard about. Only once did I see somebody that looked like a dead kangaroo. The other times the animals are so small that I can't really identify them, but they always seem like a furry animal. Once was a possum, so they might be little quolls and wombats. I can't really tell, but a lot of times there will be what looks like the Tasmanian version of a raven. They are eating, they don't seem to have vultures here, so the ravens seem to be the main scavenger. But when the ravens see my car coming, they walk off of the dead animal in the road. And so they seem very aware that when the cars come, they need to get out of the way, and then they go back to eating the dead animal at the time. So, and one animal that I saw dead on the side of this rural road, in my mind, he looked like a Tasmanian tiger, which they think since the early 1900s that the Tasmanian tiger, which was the largest marsupial, carnivorous marsupial on Tasmania, and they used to also be on the mainland of Australia, that they're extinct. But then some people, there's always rumors that there are still Tasmanian tigers. So, but I'm 99% sure it wasn't, or he or she wasn't a Tasmanian tiger just because of the statistics. But in my mind, when I drove by, it looked like a light furred animal with a little bit of a stripe. I couldn't stop or turn around on these curvy roads, and there's no place to turn around. And but because I'm reading this book called Carnivorous Nights about these writers and artists from the United States and New York that come all the way over to Tasmania to interview all these people and go on the search for the Tasmanian tiger, I think I have that on my mind. But if the Tasmanian tigers still live in Tasmania somewhere, it would be more in the deep wilderness rainforest area. It wouldn't be in this rural area where I saw that dead animal amongst all the fenced-in cows. Well, I was stopped for some road traffic to make this call, but now that we're back on the road, I need to start concentrating on the road again because, of course, it's raining and everything. I forgot to mention in my last recording when I was talking about all the farmed animals that I saw across the central part of northern Tasmania, because it was farm after farm after farm. And yes, they were mostly cows, but there are times where you see a lot of sheep, which that is very common across Australia, and Australia is known for the industry that takes the sheep's wool and sells it. But then people around also eat a lot of baby sheep known as lambs. But the sheep that I see here, maybe a lot of them have been shorn lately because they don't really seem that woolly, all the sheep that I see. But so lots of land mammals who are being farmed around here, and the chickens are just kind of loose by the road when you do see them. So it doesn't look like they're really farming chickens, or at least not in the warehouses. Then you occasionally see some horses, and because it's wintertime, almost all the horses are wearing like jackets. It's like a blanket that's fit for a horse, so it's kind of cute, but they're like none of the cows or anybody else has jackets, just the horses. Although I did see a collection of horses where only some of them have jackets, so I'm not sure if they're the ones that are liked more by the human owners, or they think that they're older, or they just need a jacket. But it's also, they're standing out there in the cold with like a wet jacket, so I'm actually not sure, how well that works. That kind of reminds me of the wet robe that I had at the Peninsula Hot Springs in Melbourne, which that was an awesome outdoor mineral hot spring that was really beautiful amongst the birds and everything. But it was super cold out, and when you're walking around, the minute you get out of the hot tub and you put on the robe, it gets all wet, and then it gets so cold. So then you're walking around in a sopping cold robe with your sopping wet cold towel. And then at some point, somebody accidentally took my wet robe because it looks like everybody else's robe. So then I only had the wet towel. But anyway, that was a really cool hot springs. The only other kind of outdoor natural hot springs I'd been to was after I finished my dissertation out at University of Oregon, and I went to some kind of like hippie new age natural clothing optional spa somewhere out in the Oregon forest. And I opted for clothing because I'm not interested in being naked around strangers. I'm not, comfortable enough for that. It might take, a month of being there before I was comfortable, but I'm really only comfortable with the nudity of other animals because they look great already, with their fur and everything and their feathers. It's just as humans that I think we really need clothing. Hi, everybody. This is a bunch of sheep who look like they've been recently shorn in Tasmania. They're very interested in me because I pulled over on the side of the road and there's literally hundreds of them. But they're in actually a very bushy and kind of native-looking pasture land, which is very different. This is closer to Swansea in the east coast, different from what I saw in the central part of Tasmania, which was more like domesticated pasture with kind of, I don't know, almost like fake turf on it. So this is more like natural grassland with shrubs and trees. But there's just so many sheep here. I feel sad looking at them, knowing that they're all going to be killed and have their flesh ripped away and sold to people who could be eating other things like produce. I never see any produce growing except for wine, grapes here. While seeing so many ranches, like ranch after ranch after ranch, pasture land, all fenced, cleared of most of the trees, that actually seems kind of normal to me, also being from the United States. But when you think about it, that land, even though usually it's in a valley, would have been all grassland or much more forested, and there would be all kinds of wild animals and not just like quote unquote monocrop like these poor sheep. Like the sheep were all the exact same age and they were shorn to the exact same level. So they all kind of look the same and they're being treated the same even though they're each individuals. So it's not like I was looking out at a wilderness area with a diversity of all different ages and species of wildlife. So, and a lot of times the ranchers, to protect their economic interests, are making sure there are no predators in the area, although honestly there's not that many predators in that. Actually, there's probably no predators except human cars when it comes to sheep and cows, because whereas the Tasmanian tiger a century ago might have been a problem with that, or I think they were, and that was part of why the Australian government and the ranchers were exterminating, actually, and paying a bounty for people to kill the Tasmanian tiger. And so the last one was spotted, I think, was in the zoo in like the 1930s. Anyway, I just wanted to point out that we could be using that land to grow lentils or beans and all kinds of produce and nuts and seeds, although it does need to be dependent on what can grow in each region. And then the rest of that pasture land could be rewilded, or it could be, part of it could be used as a place for human homes as well, like in a vertical fashion that's more eco-friendly instead of sprawling out. So I was just kind of thinking about this as I'm driving along these country roads, that we could better utilize this land and share it with the wild animals instead of having like a park where all the wild and free living animals are supposed to be, and then hundreds of miles of just farmed animal area that seems somewhat off limits to a lot of the wild animals and wild flora and fauna. So we could be living in a different way, or practice agroecology, where we're growing food in layers under the trees. And so there's just a different way we could be doing things. And I'm not just trying to pick on Tasmania. I'm just it was making me think in general about better use of the land in order to share it with wild animals, for us to use it more efficiently and not use so many hundreds of acres and clear them to grow one type of meat product that people do not need and cause all kinds of harm to the wild animals and certainly to the farmed animals. There are other things we could be eating. And another priority for land stewardship is to have the government or private owners sell the land to the Aboriginal Land Council of Tasmania so that it can grow back to its original inhabitants, the Palawa Pakana people, who were for 40,000 years the main human inhabitants and had a culture there on Tasmania, which they refer to as lutruwita. And so it was only in the early 1800s that all of that got taken away from them due to British colonization. And now they own less than 1%. Their Aboriginal people own less than 1% of an island where they used to have the whole island as their territory shared with nature. So I think that they would be good land stewards, and it's also part of just restorative justice to have them have their land back. And so the Aboriginal Land Council of Tasmania seems a good organization to support. This is the loudest bird song that I've heard since I've been in Tasmania, but this is the first time in Tasmania that I've been on the coast. So I just made it to Swansea on the east coast near Freycinet National Park, and in the trees by my little chalet where I'm staying, there's just all these wonderful birds. I can't make out, they're kind of small, I can't make out what type they are, but they're chattering and flying all around, and I'm really happy to see them. So I visited and stayed overnight in Launceston yesterday, which is Tasmania's second largest city after Hobart. And I did that as a way to break up the trip between Cradle Mountain in the west to driving to the east coast, even though really it would have only been a 4-hour drive, but driving on the other side of the road, you kind of want to break it up. And I got to see the wine region in Tasmania, the Tamar Valley wine region, yesterday. Now I'm in the town of Swansea, staying in this gorgeous tiny home, like a chalet on the beach. These are the sunrise sounds at Swansea, overlooking Freycinet Park in the background. This sunrise is panoramic and it's amazing. And then I also see some little bunnies, actually. I wasn't really expecting to see rabbits, but I think they're an introduced species here. But there's some cute little bunnies also in the grass here in front of this Swansea chalet, this beach chalet that I'm in. That is super cool. And I'm really just honored to be here with this sunrise. It's so amazing. I'm about to go, I have to drive about 45 minutes to get to the park that I can see across the bay, Freycinet National Park, and then go on a boat cruise that takes me to Wineglass Bay. So I'm really excited about that, although I honestly would be fine just sitting on the porch here and listening to the birds and the soft waves of this bay. It's really gorgeous here in Tasmania. Nice and cold, actually. I'm having a chai tea and I've got a scarf on and a sweatshirt and everything. Even though it's June, it's their winter. These are some fur seals in Tasmania and Freycinet National Park. I'm watching them float around right out off the rocks. They've got one or two flippers in the air, and they're just kind of resting in a little group here. Sometimes they're making noise. We'll see if they've got any audio here. Okay, they didn't give me any audio, but what you're hearing is me talking to one of the tour guides on this little cruise I was taking into Wineglass Bay. I was the only person on the whole boat because it's the off season. This is Anna.
Yeah, they're very unbothered by people.
Yeah, they don't care.
That
we're here.
At all. They're very used to boats. They're pretty smart. They'll know if a boat's fishing, and if they've caught a fish, they'll make sure they sidle up to that boat, wait for the fish to get tired, and then snatch it out of the fishing line and have a good snack right next to the fisherman.
Yeah. So they have a cooperative relationship with humans now.
Yeah, although I don't think the fishermen are quite that cool.
Right.
But they've got a bit of a take what you can get attitude. So they were quite heavily hunted back in the whaling and sealing days, and their population became one of the 4th rarest in the world. But since then, since that stopped, they're booming. There's more than we can handle, really. The ecosystem's quite overloaded with seals, which is it was very good to see.
Are these Tasmanian or Australian fur seals, or they're just called the fur seal?
Australian fur seals. So yeah, we see them in Tasmania, but also up the coast of Australia, to about Sydney area.
Are their main predators sharks?
Sharks and orca.
Orca, okay.
Yes, and there's not many sharks and orca around, really, so the seals are pretty comfortable.
And is it too cold for sharks right now at this time of year? Or are they?
They're still there.
Oh,
yeah, they'll be here all throughout the whole year. But we see a lot of mako sharks in the area. There is supposedly great whites, but not many sightings.
Yeah.
And hammerheads, very occasionally. Yeah.
That was some subtle bird song here on the Isthmus track between Hazards Bay Beach and Wineglass Bay Beach in Freycinet National Park in Tasmania, Australia. And to my surprise, I was the only person on the tour today. And so I had Albert and Anna, the tour guides, to myself, showing me the fur seals and the Australian pelican and an Australian eagle, both of which were black and white, which is unusual, or like gray and white, not the brown color we have in North America. So now I'm by myself, got dropped off on this big beach, tried not to get my feet wet in the really cold water getting off the boat onto the beach, and then I just have to walk across this woodsy track and then get to the other Wineglass Bay and wander around there. And that's a very famous site. You see a lot of tourism pictures in Australia at Wineglass Bay. And it's really just me and the birds so far, but I might see some mammals as well, so we'll see. And then I'm going to try to make it back for one of the pickups, like maybe a little bit early, so I don't have to drive after dark getting back, because it's very short days in wintertime here, and I don't want to drive at night because it's kind of scary and I'm on the other side of the road, but also because you're more likely to hit animals. Because I saw 4 dead kangaroos within about 30 minutes of driving on empty roads coming over here this morning to get from Swansea to Coles Bay. And and they seemed pretty freshly dead, and there's usually forest ravens scavenging on them. And I saw one live kangaroo by the side of the road, and so I actually kind of stopped. And then at that moment, out of nowhere comes a truck behind me, which normally, honestly, there was like almost nobody on the roads this morning. And so that's why I thought I could stop. But luckily, me stopping also scared that little kangaroo away from the side of the road, and she kind of went back through this fence to get out of the way. So even though I scared her by stopping, it was probably good so that she wasn't by the road, since there seemed to be so many dead kangaroos. But I did see that one live kangaroo, and maybe I'll see more today or in Maria Island. So let me get to my walk. this little patch of ferns I came across on the isthmus track between Wineglass Bay and Hazard's Beach Bay in Tasmania just happened to have a lot of little songbirds who were in these little fern bushes here, and then some other birds you can hear up in the trees, but you might have heard a little bit of the branches moving as the birds were feeding around, in the bushes here. It was just like a really rich and close encounter with birds. I can barely see them, but because of the ferns, but they're all around me, which is cool. And I could even hear some insects, which I hadn't heard any insects since I got to Tasmania, really, until today in Freycinet National Park on the east coast of Tasmania. It's a really magical and special place with all these beautiful trees around and the sun shining through them, kind of a low sun. The trees look a lot like eucalyptus type trees, and lots of green grasses and tree roots, and an unusually blue sky today. Lucky to be here. Now that I'm at the beach at Wineglass Bay in Freycinet National Park, Tasmania, and I'm standing over by these big boulders on the shore, and then there were some seagulls over there, but they flew away, and then there's all this seaweed that's up on the beach. It's huge, but it's also floating around in the water, and I'm realizing now how camouflaged the fur seals that I saw off of Hazard's Bay Beach this morning, how much they look like seaweed, the way they float in the water, alternating their flippers kind of up and down and twirling around on their back, and their fins and flippers kind of coming up and coming down. I swear the seaweed does the same thing, and it's also brown. And so the clumps of seaweed kind of looks like fur seals to me, but I really don't think there's any seals over here from what I can tell. But I think you can hear the gentle lapping of the water up on the rock. Because it's a bay, it's not actually super windy, and the waves are really kind of small. But I mean, it is off the ocean. But apparently it used to be called, it's called Wineglass Bay, partly because it is shaped like a wine glass. If you go up the mountain and you do the lookout point and you look down, it's got a curve to it. It's a really long beach. But it's called Wineglass because the color of the water used to be bright red or dark red when the whaling industry was popular here. I think back also when people were relying on whale oil for fuel. And so there would literally be blood from all these dead whales that they were killing that was in this bay. So it's just so heartbreaking that a place like this that is so beautiful and lovely and has a name, Wineglass, and it sounds pretty fun, wine. And this is a wine region, but to know that it's named after blood of whales filling up this bay. And there was another part on the tour that they showed me on the other side of Freycinet National Park, where they now just call it the fisheries, even though apparently they're not really fishing. But one of the main white guys came over and bought some land in the 1800s, and I think through the early 1900s, and they were doing whaling kind of out of there. So there is that history around the world, and it still lingers today, but there is such progress that is not happening now, and so that's fantastic. And apparently I might be able to see some orcas or some humpback whales. I don't know if I will, but I'm glad that they're no longer targeted, because this place is really beautiful. So I made it back to Hazard's Beach, which it's a very beautiful beach with a scary name. But, and it's about half an hour till Anna and Albert come to pick me back up. But some other tourists who I had seen, which honestly there had hardly been, I probably have seen, 12 people, and I've been here for 3 hours or so, in Freycinet National Park on a beautiful, sunny winter day. It's their off season, but some tourists pointed out a whale off in the distance, or a couple whales, and I can tell using my binoculars that they are humpback whales, since I was lucky enough to see humpback whales when I was in Alaska last summer, in the Bay of Alaska. So this is a different group of whales, because the ones in Alaska they migrate from Hawaii up to Alaska and back between their breeding and feeding seasons. And when I asked Anna about the humpback whales here, she says they migrate between the Queensland area, so like northern, more tropical areas of Australia, and then back down to Tasmania. And it's the winter months now in Tasmania would be the colder waters. So I don't know if they're feeding now, and they're probably breeding in the warmer waters later. But yeah, so that's exciting. And I might be able to see the whales if Anna and Albert on the way back, if, we're kind of in the area. But I know you can't get too close to whales unless they choose to come closer to your boat. Another thing I wanted to say is the sand here is so beautifully gritty. It's almost like little tiny balls. Although if somebody told me it was all microplastic, unfortunately, I would actually believe them, even though it is the color of sand that you would expect. Although there are some different colors. I took kind of a close-up of my hand with some seaweed and a lot of like white shells, like oyster type shells here. And I never saw any crabs or anything like you would see in Florida on the beach. You normally see more crabs and activity. But if it was low tide and I could kind of go out more into the seaweed areas and the rocks, I might be able to see some other marine life. So I also want to say I didn't see any mammals in Freycinet Park when I was walking on land here. And even though there are mammals in here, apparently Tasmanian devils and quolls and wombats and probably some kangaroos, but maybe they stay away from this one little track. A lot of the park doesn't have trails in it. And so if those animals want to stay away from humans, there's, I think, plenty of places for them to do that. So I really just saw birds, actually, they were the only animals that I saw. And then some marine animals here with the whales and the seals as well. So that's exciting. So it's been a beautiful day here. I hope you can hear the waves kind of lapping up kind of gently here on the beach at Hazard's Beach.
So that's the end of our journey for part 1 of the Tasmania series. This is Carrie Freeman, host of In Tune to Nature. Thank you for listening. If you have your comments on the show or you want to share something about your own Australian adventure, you can email me at carrie@wrfg.org or message me through Facebook for the In Tune to Nature show, where I have posted pictures of a lot of these places and animals that I have been talking about. Make sure to take care of yourself and others, including other species. Thank you for listening. Cheers.